welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We ask, in what ways can we show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can we mine the wisdom from the experiences of our lives and expand into those challenges? If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs, so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. And if you feel like giving a little back to this free content, please become a patron of the show and receive extra member benefits for less than a coffee a month. Or you can leave a review on iTunes and Facebook, all of which helps the podcast keep going and reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul. Head on over to patreon.com/NTM podcast to find out more. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is knowing what to leave behind and what to carry with you as we find ourselves meeting this strange point of COVID restrictions starting to hopefully reduce and life starting to take various forms of normalness back.
Yeah.
So that's where we want to take the conversation today. What else do we want to do? I want to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and sign up to join our tribe. Scrolling down to the red banner, drop in your email address, and every so often we send you an email with everything we've got happening, so that if you really want to jump in on something, go a little deeper, you don't want to miss out on knowing about the discount, the thing, the whatever, then that's the place to do it. So nourishingthemother.com.au, scroll on down and join our tribe.
And we also have to thank you again for your patience with our audio. So we are still recording remotely from each other, and so we're battling internet connections and, school at home kind of stuff with noise in the background. So thank you very much for staying with us as we navigate this, and hopefully we might even be able to be back together in future, very soon for our, nice little podcasting bubble, which we're hanging out for as well.
Yeah, so, we are. So if you're streaming live and seek more, you realise I'm outside because it took a long time to work out where my internet was going to work.
Yeah.
So here we are, makeshift recording. I'm outside. Bridget's inside in a room near the modem.
I'm like pretty much on the modem. Seems to be working so far. There we go. So where we live in Victoria, Australia, the first round of easing of restrictions has happened. And wherever you are in Australia, you're likely experiencing that too. Some of our international listeners won't be feeling that. The situation is a bit more different in Australia. However, there is light, I think, at the end of the tunnel for everybody who can see beyond, the reality that we've had for a number of months now. And so with that comes this, I think depending on your circumstances, comes this sense of relief or maybe even a sense of grief around how you're feeling in this transition, what you're wanting to take with you as life returns to, some semblance of normality, although, I think that it's really a new normal, and what is that going to look like? We don't know that really. But for all us as individuals, it's been a much almost like a birth process of, having to go into that descent of, terror and maybe pain and then finding the beauty in it and then being birthed into a new reality. And this is the great edit, I think, in terms of where we want to what we want to put back in, I think, is the offering up that this stage gives us. And so we really want to open up the conversation on that, both between ourselves and for you to ponder as you listen where you are, because it's no doubt in your mind too.
Yeah. So I think that the conversation for me really resides around boundaries. And I think and I'm sure you'll agree, Bridget, as a collective of women, we are still learning how to navigate boundary.
Yeah.
And in such a way that it's not so hard and fast that once you put down a line, that's it, that fence is constructed and built forever, and in fact just grows taller or bigger. But boundary in such a way that, you know, there's boundary at the meeting point of the ocean to the beach, and there's boundary at the meeting point from, you know, forest to open field, and that those boundaries can create new life, can offer new experiences, and in and of themselves are seasonal and do change but ebb and flow with the creation of life at that meeting point. So the creation of boundary for women, I think we have a long way to go in really intuitively being able to step into what we so love to fling around, which is our full-bodied yes. And yet I wonder, the deeper and the more women that I work with, the less I think we know what that means, because as a culture we've mostly been conditioned out of what our personal preferences and needs are, to the point where even if I offered you the open slather of I'm the genie, tell me what you want and I'll give it to you, most women answer me with, I don't even know what I want. And so then I think, well, then I like to work with that differently, but I think that's the place to start, because you can't start constructing boundaries if you don't know what you want or need and how you want it and need it. You can't make a wall and then try and work out how to live in the wall. It kind of works the other way around. So, I mean, what do you think about boundaries and women collectively?
It's something for me that I've been thinking a lot about, particularly with the ages that my kids are at, and also my work and my relationship, and all of those things. There's areas that I really want to grow, but I'm also having to look really practically about, you know, I can't do, be, and have everything right now. And my baby is moments away from walking. She's becoming a toddler, and that is for me where boundaries, you really have to be able to sit in your own self and decide what they look like at this stage, because things are changing so fast and her needs are growing in many ways because of all the ways in which she needs me to notice her and hold boundaries and guide her, at the same time as how that then changes the rest of the family because of where I'm having to focus with her. And it changes for me how I feel about my own personal space. You know, I think that she's at an age now where we're co-sleeping with her, which I'm still comfortable with, but you know, there's aspects of it that I'm like, I don't really like my head being climbed on all of the time in the mornings, you know. So what does it look like for me to set boundaries in that way, and to ask my husband to step in so that I can have my boundaries met, you know, even as I'm still working out what they are. And another boundary is, you know, even this whole thing around our kids' education, and how much is for us to pave the way for them, and how much is it for us to also allow that, you know, look on the fact that they're born at this time with the system that we have, and for us to give a level of ownership to them on, okay, how are you going to navigate this? Because there's a part of me that's like, I have all these ideals, but I'm not Superwoman, and I'm not willing to give up the other parts of me that I really want to nurture in order to take that up and own that, run that. So that's another one that I'm sitting with. That's like, yeah, I get this is not ideal and this isn't ideal, and this is the conversation that I had with my husband. We had a really long conversation about it, and about our viewpoints, and you know, also what our personal preferences are, and you know, it's also recognizing that sometimes you're.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, because
I'm interested in how that went, because I'm hearing from a number of women after, you know, we did that podcast, and I was like, I think it was a post, I can't remember now, and I was like, oh my God, I had like the biggest argument with my husband I've ever had over this, to homeschool or not to homeschool, and that whole world that just got completely bust open. And actually I'm receiving a number of messages from women finding themselves at that exact place, you know, where what they previously thought worked, they realise isn't what they thought it was. And then what does that mean? And potentially their partner's sitting in a completely different viewpoint. So this education discussion that you had, are you able to sort of bring a little bit more something to it?
Yeah, so I was saying to him for a while, look, you know, I'm doing a lot of researching on homeschooling at the moment. You know, the more and more I'm learning, the more and more I'm not you know, down with even sending him back right now. there's a lot of things I'm concerned about. And we talked through what the things were, so I kind of said, look, how do we even just determine that this is what he needs to know right now, and that this is the right way to teach him, and that he's in amongst this group of, kids all at the same age and all being taught the same thing, and he's maybe like not even sure what he's learning. And my husband was like, yeah, like I get it. And he said, but also remember like how much he gets from us at home, and how much that school is one way of teaching our kids, but think about all of the critical thinking skills and all of the different ways of looking at life that we give him at home, and how much of a beautiful melting pot that can offer him to be able to choose what he wants to take. And this is what I keep coming back to in myself too, because the reality is if I was to homeschool, I would probably unschool. And there'd be a significant process of de-school in order to unschool. And when you unschool, I see it as there's no real going back once you decide to unschool, because if you want to put your child back in the system, you could leave them really hard done by, because it's a lot harder to get them up to scratch, because they're not going to have spent the days of rote learning that passages them through a number of years of learning at school. And so that feels like an enormous responsibility for me to make that decision, and know that like it's not that easy to just pop him back in school. And people might say that it is, but I challenge that, because I don't know that it would be. Simply because if you're unschooling and you're going to child-led, my son in particular is not really going to want to do a lot of writing and a lot of spelling and all that kind of stuff, because it's not his interest, and school is really focused on that. And so then the anxiety that may come up if I'm pushing him back into that system, without that grounding, could be significant. So I'm looking at that end of it, and I'm not just kind of going, oh, we'll just do what we want for the year, which is kind of where I was going at. So anyway, I talked through all those sides with my husband, and then I'm, looking at my bigger picture and where I want to grow. And there's an enormous path that I want for myself around, my own embodiment, what kind of like direction I want my work to take once my girls are older. And I don't feel like I can give myself that at the same time as taking on the full responsibility of my children's education. I don't think that there's room for both. And so that's kind of hard to own, because the idyllic part of me really wants to go, yeah, we'll just like throw away the system and be guided by our, what lights us up. So the whole discussions have been too, like, me really examining, aspects of my own shadow, which I know like are often kind of idealistic, and sometimes
aren't we all, when we're looking at the thing that we really want, we're like, it's just going to work.
Yeah. So I've really had to feel into the times when, and I've been talking a little bit to Gillian from Bornwise about. Like,
I tell you, I love her. I feel like we were just meant to meet her.
She's so fantastic. But I was saying to her, like, what about like the days when I don't feel like it, and all of that stuff, and I don't know, like I think I already have a pretty high parenting bar. To take on the bar of like responsibility for education just feels like fucking massive, and I just don't think I'm up for it.
I get it.
So that's really where the conversation went. But I said to my husband, look, I really just want it to be at every point in his schooling journey that we are paying close attention to what works and not what's not working, and that we're willing to challenge the system where we can, and that if we find that it's really not, that it's, maybe he does suffer from, anxiety, or, if he hits a really tough road, because at the moment he goes okay, like he's made lots of friends and he's okay at school. He doesn't love it, but he does okay. I guess I just really wanted that affirmation from him as well, that at every point we're not just like subordinating to this because you have to, because I don't believe that you have to do anything. I think that there's always opportunity when you're willing to look for it. And so that was really where we got to. And also a conversation on more days off, like, so building more flexibility into the term, because I'm home with the girls, we have a lot of opportunity to go on, like, do stuff. And so I'll be building more of that in to our terms as well when I can see that he's needing a break. Because what this has also taught me is that I really wish school wasn't 5 days a week. Like, I'd love it if it was like 3 or 4, you know, and kind of like I think a lot of people would feel like they wish that the working week was set up to be shorter. And what I certainly feel like as a collective consciousness is that this whole experience has thrown up in the air every structure that we've decided that we've accepted and said, this is all up for reorganisation. What do you want? And I feel that intuitively. And so that's, I guess, why I've had to look at everything that we're subscribing to and going, does this fit? Does this fit? Does this work like this? You know, like, because it's all up to us now. Yeah, so that's kind of where we've got to.
Yeah. I've had a couple of girlfriends say actually that they'll be just at school 3 days a week and then doing home learning 2 days a week.
Wow. And how was and they've like navigated that with school?
Well, one was already doing it. So it's like a friend of a friend was already doing it. That was her established way of belonging to the school program. And seems to be fine. And my other friend was probably naturally a natural homeschooler, but has significant health concerns and just went, you know, I recognise that it's beyond my capacity right now. But what would make me feel good is if we had 1 day a week or 2 days a week where we could be of the land and with the land, and that we structure learning from that perspective because they have property. And, you know, work certainly around states of permaculture and sustainability. So she really wishes to instill those perceptions of the world through that lens. So that's the decision that she's made. So I've toyed with that. I have known people in the past who've tried it and have experienced resistance from the school system to working well with that. Ultimately, they can't say no. Ultimately, they might make it difficult, and so this school that my friend is at down the peninsula, it makes it really easy for her to do that. And it seems really, it's a bit more of a, I suppose, a sustainable community. So perhaps more, it's just the nature of the clientele in the area that then makes the school more flexible versus perhaps closer to the city where things are more go, go, go and there's less room for flexibility. So I would say seek an establishment that offers you more flexibility if you're obtaining more resistance, because it's not about you can or you can't. It's simply about the system that you choose and whether that's something that they're willing to or not.
I mean, in Australia, it depends on the state though. So part-time schooling is allowed in some states of Australia and not in others.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know.
So it's okay in Victoria, but I think in some states it's not.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Anyway, we will deviate the conversation from school because we could end up down a rabbit warren.
I know. We weren't going to take it here, but I think it's been a big part of the boundary setting for me. And I know it has been for you in terms of thinking about your own mental health and, you know, and like your values and this is a big thing, right? Because I guess we're thrust into it at the moment, the parents with kids at school, and how much we want to give of ourselves to that essentially. So that's one of the edges of boundaries that I've been feeling into. Yeah. What about
toddlerhood I think it's so interesting that you said toddlerhood represents a real re-establishing or re-equilibrating or re-evaluating of boundary, because it brings up this really almost clearly defined line between one way of being and belonging to the world with this tiny infant and another way where all of a sudden that tiny infant is less dependent and can move about the world more independently. And I kind of think that's every age and stage of our children. This is why boundaries can't be firm and don't exist. Sorry, I am outside and so are my kids. So please just disregard the background noise. So I do really love that whole idea of looking at boundaries even from the viewpoint of growth, and particularly in our families, that everything is up for renegotiation when one member of the family experiences growth and change, because there's a ricocheting effect of all of those dominoes shifting, you know, position again as everyone re-equilibrates and finds a new place of being. So with that in mind, I think particularly in larger families like yours and mine, Bridge, when are you not in a state of flux and needing to check in with your boundaries?
stressful every day, every hour.
Right. That's my point, because we are continuously beings of change.
Yeah.
And I think you end up with more psychological distress and dis-ease if you try to remain as static as possible in amongst total chaos. I think instead it's far better off to consider the construct of boundaries being fluid and honouring and healthful for the entire organism, of which the family is a whole organism, and then individually, so is each individual, and considering what's the health of the environment for everybody internally and externally as the whole. So I much preferred it. That I liked what you were saying, I essentially is what I'm saying. I love that idea of just continuously even looking outside of us with, you know, our family and our children for, oh, this is a boundary renegotiation here. This is why it's feeling weird or funky or has dredged up emotions and, you know, sludge from the past, and it feels like it's in the present, but really it's not. And I think it's just that beautiful invitation for, oh, this is like, you know, throwing the sand up in the air and we're waiting to see where it settles. And I kind of think you can resist that and create more rigidity and make it harder, or you can find a state of belonging to that feels honouring. And that's what we're talking about when we say, what do you want? What do you need? Knowing that what you want and need right now in this hour may not be what you want and need in the next hour. And in fact, this is one of the most, you know, crucial learnings, I think, of being in a relationship between a masculine and a feminine being. And my husband and I joke about this all the time. You know, I'll be like, I don't know, we joke about him that he, you know, I say, what do you think I want or need here? Or, you know, do you know what I want today? And he's like, how ridiculous is that even as an idea? Because whatever I think it is right now, it won't be tomorrow or next week or, you know, like, he's like, it's the most ridiculous thing. It's like, it doesn't even matter. What does it matter what I work out right now? Because it's not going to be relevant in the next 5 minutes.
And it's so funny. Like that too, and I'm really like I'm really trying to unlearn the parts of me that all feel hurt by that, you know, because we are so you know, the feminine is so kind of like judged, and we try to cut off parts of that because, you know, our wife, there's linear commitment, this is the path, keep showing up, you know, when your heart
please stay the same and consistent. But
your heart's going for this and for this and for this, and I feel this, and you know, all of that.
Totes. Yeah, totes. So I love this idea of just boundaries really just being a practice, a state of what is most honouring in this moment and most healthful for the organism, be it the individual self or, you know, the larger family unit as well. I think that's a really beautiful conversation. So when it comes to walking out of a place and a space like COVID, same as any time of immense change when everything has been thrown up for renegotiation and has brought with it new awareness, because where there's death and dying and a letting go of a particular way of belonging to the world, there's also an equal space and opportunity for birth. But often in this community, in this culture, we tend to just like life. We don't want there to be death.
Yeah.
So it can feel really hard when we're faced with death that we can't ignore. You know, death of the way of life being, the death of what was, the death of what will never be again, that we forget that in those moments there's just as much opportunity for birth and recreation. And there has to be right, the phoenix has to disappear into ashes to be reborn. Like, it's just part of the cycle of life. It's the feminine, it's the existence of how we come to be matter. So I don't know what my point in saying that was, actually. I think just this whole idea of what do you want to let go of? Like, I think when we're in these rites of passage, we have to really consciously ask ourselves, okay, we're here. It's all been thrown up in the air. And if I could just place all of those things as have a floating object that represents each one of those ways of belonging or being or existing or feeling in the world, and I put them all up with an object in space and time, and I sit in the bottom of that dark cave, I almost imagine, can we pick one up and look at it and go, is this coming with me? Am I tucking it in my pocket and carrying it with me as I exit this cave? Or am I saying thank you for this way of belonging, and in the best condo way, leaving it at the cave when we, you know, move on? I kind of think that's the process of decluttering our inner space to to birth the life that we're wanting to live, as opposed to feeling like, God, we have to drag such a heavy load and sack behind us because we've never had a conscious opportunity of decluttering our internal space, or consciously asking, what is it that I want to take with me and what is it that I don't? And I do think sometimes, I was working with a woman the other night and I was saying to her, you know, sometimes it can feel, even though this is birth, it can feel like death because you're having to almost rip off a skin. Like it can feel irritating and itchy, like, you know, like the snake shedding its skin, as you're like almost trying to peel off this layer of skin that has come to be part of you, and you're trying to, you know, literally sometimes tear it off of your very being. And that's brutal. That can feel like pain, even though it is birth. So I just also think this is the purpose of having something in some form that is ritualized and ceremonial, so that the psyche has a way of adapting and playing catch up to what is happening. So we complete feelings and we can reconcile ways of being without it needing to be incomplete and held onto and carried with us in this half, you know, weird jumbled sack of all bits and pieces that are broken, you know. I know I'm speaking very metaphorically, and I'm always aware that sometimes I lose people in that. So does that make sense, Bridget?
It makes sense. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's just, I think it's a powerful time of contemplation and visioning as well. I mean, and visioning sometimes in the smallest of ways. Like I think it can be visioning in terms of how you're developing self-responsibility in your children so that you don't carry the burden of all of the things, right? And that takes practice and that takes commitment, you know, and it takes, you know, patience, but that's also part of visioning how you want to be regarding yourself in all of your roles in your home and in your life, and also the parts that you want to give your children to develop their own self-responsibility, you know, because often it takes longer to teach that, but the payoff and the, you know, the sovereignty that we're allowed when we don't pick up everything and we don't take responsibility for everything is that we get to feel far more whole, I think, than splintered based on everybody else's needs. And so I think that's really powerful to consider as well.
Do you have a process that you're using in knowing what to leave behind and what to carry forward?
I think it's still coming together for me. I think I'm still feeling into what I want that process to be. I think I'm doing it intuitively. Like even this morning, like I had to bundle the kids up. At the first time we've really had to get out of the house, and it's just like a fucking shit show. Like because everyone's out of practice of it. Pearl's, you know, 2 months older now than she was when we last were regularly out of the house, and so it just takes so much longer, and I could feel myself getting frustrated. And then it's like, okay, what needs to happen here? What structures do I need to make this more easeful and to help everybody feel empowered in this, as opposed to me feeling stressed before we've even left the house, right? Because I don't want to go back to that feeling. And that,
yeah, me neither.
So it's, you know, I really sat with that on the drive to my mum's, was like, okay, what do I need to do here around helping my kids feel empowered, and myself and my husband too, because like we're both feeling the burn of just the constancy of kids, right? Even though it's lovely, it's also constant. And how do we help our space flow more effectively to meet all of us, you know? And that's what I'm asking myself a lot. So in terms of my family structure, and, you know, we're building a lot of this. I'm thinking a lot about my own practices as I prepare for the retreat that we're running, because I really want to bring, you know, something really wholehearted for that, because I think in many ways the retreat is that pause to help yourself work through what you're ruminating on, and to allow to die what you don't need anymore and what has become stagnant, to create space to birth what's wanting to come through. And I feel that on a huge level, like individually and collectively right now. Like this is where we're at. We're at this, you know, crossroads and in so many areas of life. What do you want to leave and what do you want to take with you? Have you got a practice that you're doing at the moment?
Look, I always ritualize my practices. I think the second I can bring a tangible physical out of my own head practice, whether that be putting conscious questions that I answer outside of my own head and put it on paper, that I can amplify its effect of by adding simply a candle that I light with a blessing or blow out with a letting go, or, you know, a burning or a burying or a symbolic letting go of some sort, or, affirmation creation. Like I do, for me, there always has to be an element of ritual and ceremony, even if it's 5 minutes, and my whole body just kind of takes this breath. And I think it's then I can see with clarity what I really want and need, rather than assuming that my mind has all of the answers, which it doesn't. And I think we make the biggest mistake that we're such good thinkers as women that we can just think it and we'll sort it out by thinking about it more and thinking about it more and thinking and then answering our own questions in our head. But if we don't ever have a process of getting it outside of us, then I don't think it's like having the support team that just says, you're so right. That's exactly right. Like you never have the opportunity to expand your thinking, to challenge it, to ask what else, if you just keep it in your head.
Yeah. Or you just seek out people who are going to, or if you only seek out people who you know are going to support you, you know.
Yeah, but I think we do that for ourselves in our own head when we don't leave it. If you do not have a physical and literal practice of removing what is in your mind outside of you, I think that's what you do in your own mind anyway. You assume you have all of the answers, you've thought of all of the solutions, that's just the way reality is, or you miss so much in that process, I think. So for me, there's always an element of ritual and ceremony with it, but that looks different just by virtue of I love ritual and ceremony. So the more creative I can get with it, usually the better it feels. And often I have to fight myself to do it. Like it's often I'm like, oh God, I don't even want to have to. I want to spend 5 minutes to do that. That sounds awful. I'd rather just slump on the couch and do nothing, you know, blah, blah, blah. But 100% of the time when I take that next step, which I think is the self-discipline that actually allows you greater opening, it pays off tenfold. So that's why I think it's important to have spaces, structures and places in which you have an accountability buddy almost for doing the work that otherwise, if you stay in your own head, you'd just give yourself the, you know, hallway pass for.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. Well, you know, and I mean, that's also what intimate relationships are great at too, because when you do, like, because, you know, my husband had to kind of coax a lot of this out of me because, you know, I was still kind of keeping it a lot in my head. But it's so powerful when you do go and kind of go, oh, this is all of the stuff.
Yeah, outside of you.
Yeah. And then you get the challenge, but you also get the support to be able to move the challenge into something meaningful.
Exactly, 100%. So I do think that's why it's really important to be able to do that. And I do think it's worth examining all of the fears. Fear and grief are two really normal experiences whenever we come out of something like this, whenever we're asked to face change, whenever boundary is up for renegotiation and that, you know, sand or glitter has been thrown up in the air and you're feeling a bit free-falling. Grief and fear are what are normal processes there. Really normal. If you didn't have those, that to me would be abnormal. But the experience of the experience of fear and grief is really there for you to work out exactly this question. What am I leaving behind? What am I carrying with me? What is it that I wish to step into and be when I walk out of this cave? You know, like it's really about just getting way more conscious about the creation of who you're becoming and what you want your life to look like. So, yeah, that's me. What do you think?
Big.
Anything
It's
left
really,
for you?
it's just I'm just kind of contemplating the bigness of it, but then also how much actually when you have some structures or you have some, you know, rituals, because for me it's been journaling actually a lot lately, how much that is actually like the freedom's very often staring you in the face. You know, but it's your own complex stories that block you from seeing it, I find. I'm about to run out of phone battery, so I'm just trying to plug myself in.
All right, I was wondering what you do. But that's what I mean by fear, is I often think we stop at the thing that we're scared of because we don't realize we're in a state of fear about something that we're future projected or attached meaning to. And we're meaning-making creatures 100% of the time. We automatically like attach meaning to something. That meaning may not be correct, but it's about taking that pause to realize, oh, hang on a minute, this feeling, I'm actually scared. Like the thought of leaving COVID and becoming social again actually terrifies me. Like if I actually stayed at that point, I could hyperventilate and just want to be a hermit and think there's something wrong with me because I don't actually want to see people ever again. The thought of sitting and having coffee with my friends sounds horrific. I don't want to do it. I really don't. I'll just stay here.
Why? Because you become so comfortable in your cocoon.
No, because that's a fear state. I could choose to believe that because that's the meaning I've attached to that feeling, right?
Yeah.
Is when I think about leaving COVID, I go, seeing all of my friends again, coffee dates, needing to be with people, having to be social, and I go, I don't want that. So I've attached leaving COVID means I'll be demanded to be at coffee dates, or I'll put self-guilt on being at coffee and catching up with friends. And I'm terrified of doing that. So I could stop at that and go, oh, okay, I don't really want to be social, or I don't want to be out doing coffee dates, or maybe, you know, I actually just don't want to re-enter the world and I want to stay here. Or I could take a pause and just go, what actually is that feeling? And when I think about it, I'm actually just terrified of leaving this bubble and being so busy again. Now I've attached that to the demands of social pressures, which sit lower on my hierarchy of values than all of the other shit that sits above it. So I've automatically made the leap to, I've attached that fear to being representative of coffee dates with my friends, which it isn't. What I'm scared of is the demand on my time and the busyness. So as soon as I can pull that out and actually look at the meaning and separate it rather than believing that it's a truth, I can go, oh, hang on a minute. No, I do really love my friends. I do actually really want to spend time with my friends, but not when it's rushed and not when I have the pressure of doing all of these other things, and only when it feels in flow. So I go, oh, okay, no, that's okay, because that's my boundary, right? So instead of going, I felt a feeling, which is fear, I've attached it instantly to the first thing that comes into my brain, friends, that means this, and I've already made all of this meaning about the thing that isn't really a truth because I haven't spent time about unraveling. And if I unravel it, really all of that feeling just relaxes in my body and I feel power. I feel power again, as opposed to powerlessness, which is often when fear rises up. No, that's okay. I know what I want to carry with me and what I don't. So that's what I mean by, I think you've just got to be aware of when fear rises its head and at will, and looking at the meaning and the space that you've taken, and perhaps the grief in that, even the grief of losing, or what feels like a deeper, more apparent loss of this bubble than what it feels like I'm gaining. Of course, the truth is there's equal challenge and support, but because of the way that I choose to view this world and the values that I choose to instill, then I see it as a bigger loss than a gain. Doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah.
So I just think it's about having these practices to mentally get outside of yourself. Are you losing battery? Are you having all sorts of trouble?
Yeah, I'm just trying. I might have to wrap up this podcast because I don't think I've got much longer to go.
That's right. I think we're at time anyway. I think we're at time. So on the 31st of May, we have our Mother Soul Retreat. So we want you to come back into the soul of who you are at the center of Mother. And we want you to know what it is that you are carrying with you as you leave this cocoon and cave to make a more meaningful life and we want to walk you through 4 hours of practice and process with that, with the two of us together. So it will be a virtual online retreat via Zoom. If you're in Soul Driven Motherhood, then you get automatic, sorry, Siri keeps popping up for me every time I say an S. You get automatic access to it if you're in Soul Driven Motherhood. And otherwise you can choose to just come to the retreat, and the 4-hour retreat with us online is $99. So all of those links will be in the show notes and on our social media feed and on our website. So you can go and check those out, nourishingthemother.com.au. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Bridgie?
Just to really have gentleness and reverence for yourself as you navigate this, and carve out space for contemplation and for the editing and for the introspection and the ritual as you make this move. And I think too that embodiment piece that Julie was suggesting too, it's just really, really important, because we are given an enormous opportunity as we make this transition, and as mothers and as kind of the captains of the ship of our homes, we have enormous power to be really intentional right now. And I really invite you to consider that too, and take ownership of what you can as you shepherd all of your family through this, yourself and your family.
All right. So we would love you to join us. So Mother Soul Retreat. You can find out about that on all of our socials. And Bridgie, you go.
To connect with me at SuburbanSandcastles.com, and you, Jules?
Oh, I forgot that bit. Nutritionist.com.
And remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
And if you want to support Nourishing the Mother and all the late nights, the early mornings, the blood, sweat and tears we pour into our art, then please go to patreon.com/NTM podcast and become our patron. As a patron, you're helping all of the cost of operating this podcast, the hosting, the editing, the transcription, helping all of that be completely covered, and joining a community who are all about honouring our journeys and continuing to open. The more support we have, the longer we can last. So become a patron. We'd love to have you. Go to patreon.com/NTM podcast. We literally couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much for listening, and please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.